Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Katrina McAfee with Association Analytics. We're very excited to have Blue Sky eLearn here today on our partner webinar. We're going to give it just a minute for everyone to get logged in. I see everyone coming in. Our fun question of the day. What is your most memorable or favorite Halloween costume? I'm going to put Bill on the spot. You said you didn't have one. Do you have one as a kid?
You know what? I was one of those kids. I had the same one for like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. I think I still have it somewhere. Like my son wore it for a year or two. It's really just a mask that it had an outfit to go with it, but I lost the outfit. It's like a skeleton sort of thing, and we over the years got embellished with all sorts of blood and you know, like I think I stuck a knife in it one year and stuff like that. So
nice.
Yeah.
Recycled costumes to the kids. There you go. What about you, Kristen?
So my mom was big into sewing when I was a kid, and I have 2 younger sisters. And one year she decided that all 3 of us were going to be pilgrims, and she was going to sew our pilgrim costumes. And I was 11 and mortified and so upset that every picture from that Halloween, I'm just grouchy.
That's fun. Well, I'm a twin, so all of my photos when we were kids are, you know, the same costume until a certain age when I'm sure we demanded that we have different costumes.
That's funny. All right. Yeah, I don't see too many people chiming in with this.
And no one's sharing. I just asked it in the chat, but hopefully as people come in, maybe you'll see that and you can share. But I think we can go ahead and get started. So thanks for joining, everyone. This is a partner webinar with Association Analytics and Blue Sky eLearn. We're super excited to have them here. We're going to be talking about what your data is telling you about your next piece of, and we kind of adjusted this from the webinar invite, learning content, because that is Blue Sky eLearn's topic of expertise. So we're super excited to have them here. Our speakers today, you guys know Bill. He is our SVP of Strategy and Solutions. So he's got over 20 years experience in software products and services, 10 years with associations and nonprofits. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Bill right now. I think you're going to kind of kick us off before we introduce Kristen.
I am. Yeah. So look, if anyone has pictures, bonus points to anyone that if you can scout one out before the end of the session, I think we can figure out how to invite you on so that you can show it. I'd love to see KISS, especially. I had a lot of KISS 8-track tapes when I was a kid, so that was interesting memory for me. Okay, so let's get started. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to have an introduction, of course. We're going to talk about data-informed learning content. So this is kind of most of Kristen's piece. We're going to talk about something very interesting that I learned about recently called scope and sequence. I think that's going to be something that's going to be new for many of us. Leveraging the data universe and the LMS. This is more of the broader data ecosystem. So some of the ways that you can use Acumen or similar tools to not only to inform that data, but also to leverage it on the other end. We'll talk about some key takeaways, and as always, we'll have Q&A. Do encourage everyone to ask questions throughout, right? So don't necessarily save your questions until the end. So what about this idea of data-informed content? So some of you have been on our webinars before. You've seen these results before. So we asked the question, to what extent does your association use data to inform your content decisions? You can see the results there. But if you kind of add it up, it's 85% of us said that we use data to inform, at least some of the time, right, to inform our content decisions. So this is not a very exact, survey instrument, for this particular case, right? Because we didn't really ask it specifically for learning content. So I wonder, right, if I ask the question specifically for learning content, how many people on the call, right? Just so you could answer in the chat if it's an affirmative for you, how many would answer yes, right? That you most of the time or always use content to inform your decisions about your learning products. One other interesting thing is we did some demographics, right? This was not, didn't give like the name of your association, but we did some demographics with this, and it was, Galina, how are you? Good to see you. Of course, expect a yes from you. Okay, so one of the things that we found that was interesting about this particular question is the answers were very uniform across all sizes of associations. So for whatever that's worth, the small ones as well as the large ones were answering this in the affirmative at about the same rate. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our very special guest, Dr. Kristen Wall. I'm not going to introduce her. I'm going to allow her to introduce herself, I should say.
No problem. Thanks, Bill. So welcome. I'm really happy to be here today. It's a lot of fun to meet new people virtually. I'm the Director of Learning Strategy and a Fractional Chief Learning Officer at Blue Sky eLearn. I have 20 years of experience in education. I started as a junior high teacher and 3 years with associations and nonprofits. And one thing that I work with our clients a lot to help them do is to kind of figure out what data they have, what data they need, and then figure out how to translate that data into actionable steps that they can use to either develop new learning or use it to evaluate their current learning. So let's first start with the question, what are the most useful data you're currently gathering? Maybe you've had a new insight, maybe you've got access to something new, but what's the most useful data you're currently gathering? I know a lot of my clients are really interested in stages of career because they're developing strategies, or they're developing learning tracks around the stages of a learner's career, making sure to highlight particularly the people who are new to the career and making sure that they have educational content that really helps to fill the gaps between those new to career folks' understanding of the field and allowing the association to create content that can really help them to be successful in the field.
Yeah, so let's think outside the box on this a little bit. Okay, so we people are saying email addresses, of course. Yeah, designation. That's an interesting one. So let's target this towards learning, right? And so when it comes to either creating your learning products or refining them, kind of improving them over time, what's the most useful data that you're gathering baseline data related to national measures? So that makes a lot of sense, right? So what are the things that you're gathering that are useful for that purpose, right? So without that qualifier, right, we're gonna I think the answers like email addresses or just broader demographics and things like that are maybe the most useful across wide swath, right, of all of our different data sources. Okay, survey data. All right, great.
Okay. Someone said they're not sure they're collecting data to determine content. So I'm assuming maybe that's one of the reasons that you're on our conversation today. So as we talk through this, I'm going to be kind of using the perspective of an imaginary client. So they've signed with Blue Sky eLearn. They're an association, and the board has added education to their strategic plan. The association team has some ideas. During COVID, they'd done some really successful webinars, so they weren't completely in the dark about how to develop content, but they wanted to have a strategy, and they wanted to be intentional, and they wanted to have a vision for the why. And a lot of times the why comes from your strategic plan, but sometimes your board doesn't have a really clear understanding of what the why is. And so you want to have a conversation around how does learning fit in with the strategic plan and what are the goals of that learning. So maybe one or all of these bullet points apply to you. But as we go through this, I'm just taking that imaginary client and I'm working with them, and I'm talking to them about the kinds of data that they can collect and what they can do with that data once they've collected it.
Great. So Kristen, tell us a little bit about the most common whys that you run into, right? I mean, so we know that there's an inherent value in learning. So leaving that aside for a second, what are some of the reasons that your clients are looking to either implement a more robust education program or improve on the ones that they have?
Sure. So it becomes a part of the membership. A lot of times it's a member benefit. And so the board's decided we want to add this as a member benefit. It can be an additional revenue stream. And so some of our clients are dipping their toe into educational content because they need to expand their revenue. Sometimes it's because they have a new board who really wants to expand the impact and the thought leadership of the association. And so in order to expand their impact, they're looking at developing educational content to reach more people. And it can also be used as a membership tool, you know, creating free content as an incentive to look at what's available and then becoming a membership as a result of that. So it's used as a marketing tool sometimes as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you got them all. If anyone has another reason why you or your board would like to improve on their education, add it to the chat. I think that would be good information for all of us. Okay.
So first, you're going to look at your close-up, and these are the kinds of data that are likely to be pretty easy to get. So first of all, I recommend to everyone to reach out to their marketing team, because I find with a lot of my clients that marketing has this data and education has this data, and a conversation between the two can really be beneficial. And I'll talk more about that in just a second. Looking at your member surveys, I saw that in the chat that's a big source of information about your learners. Doing a look at your existing content and doing an inventory of your current content to make sure that you are able to regularly review your content and identify gaps. And I'll talk about more about that in just a moment as well. And then looking at your LMS reporting. So for instance, looking at assessment results. How are your learners doing in your courses? Are they passing? If they're not passing, is it because of certain test questions or certain requirements? You know, lots of LMS reporting is available. And so digging into that, and Bill's going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment as well. But just thinking about what kind of feedback you have from your learners, whether they intentionally gave it to you or not, is really helpful. And then once you get done with your close-up, you can move on to your big picture. And at this point, I'm going to take over the screen.
Okay. Yeah, as Kristen's taken over here, I want to encourage everybody to think about you know, the LMS data and the LMS reports, and think about how to not only to inform what content should be, you know, part of your learning products, right? What courses should you create and all of that, but how can you improve them, right? So that all of that sort of more granular data on, you know, specific performance, whether it's specific questions and things like that. And so think of it in terms of how we can provide a better learning experience, right? So Heidi says improved patient care is one of the whys, you know, for their organization. So particularly for you know, for medical organizations, if there's any type of certification or any type of training, it's not just like filling the content box and providing that sort of sort of low-level member benefit. I mean, this is really a key part of the value proposition, and it makes sense to not just think about the engagement aspect of it, but the actual quality of the education itself. So, okay, sorry about that. That was a bit of a detour, but let's talk about big picture.
So you're also, not only are you looking at a close-up of your organization, but you're also looking at the big picture of your industry. What changes are coming within your industry? Maybe you have an accrediting body that you need to respond to. They make periodic changes. The federal government, state and local government can all have an impact on a lot of our associations. Thought leaders, you know, there's folks like Bill out there who are producing content and proposing new ideas, and maybe you want to pursue one of those new ideas. And so you're looking to thought leadership for those kind of new ideas that you haven't tried before, and new incentives to try things. And then lastly, look at your competitors. And this is something that I see a lot of times with our association clients, is that they haven't they haven't really looked at what else is going on in the landscape. And some of their competitors may be providing or offering content that is in direct alignment with the organization that I'm working with. But it's a really important piece of the gap analysis of looking at what are your competitors doing and where are there places that you can fill that would give you a competitive edge and differentiate you from others in the industry or the field. So once you do the big picture, here's some examples of the types of information that can be helpful to you. So first, let's say you do a quick run of reports on your most popular courses, and you realize that in course A, the assessment results indicate that your learners are struggling with a couple of questions. Well, rather than pitching the whole class, you can use that information to go back to a subject matter expert, or maybe do a small focus group on people who completed the course and say, hey, what was the struggle? Where was the confusion? And maybe you can clean that up and help your learners be more successful in that class. Another example would be you've run a LinkedIn campaign and it's produced 3 topics. So in this scenario, the association has posted a blog post on LinkedIn and attached a poll to that. The blog post was already really popular. They think they want to create content around that idea, but they really need to drill down a little bit more into what was valuable to the learners. And so they link to that blog post and they list 3 of the topics that were in the blog post and just ask the learners, what is most interesting to you? So it's a way of doing a little bit of market research that's not a big, heavy lift. Another example is your industry. I know we're all subscribed to so many newsletters, but staying on top of those is helpful because your industry newsletter will also give you a heads up about things that are changing that may impact one of your key course topics. And so you need to be prepared to pivot with that. And then lastly, your member survey, which was mentioned in the chat a couple times, indicates a need for more training on 3 topics. Generally, what we get from learners is a really broad category. They don't always give us the most detailed information about what they want. And so one way you can respond to that is, okay, we've got this member survey, we've got these 3 topics. Let's create 3 small pieces of content. You can call it microlearning or you can call it something else, but create 3 small pieces of content that can be used as a test. And put it on your social media or put it on YouTube or put it on LinkedIn or put it on your website, whatever makes the most sense. Put it on your learning management system, of course. Whatever makes the most sense to really help you figure out what's going to be popular, what's going to be of interest to your learners. I see a lot of that with clients, and I'm encouraging clients to do that. Just start making small pieces of content that can help to either market a course that you're already developing or do a little bit of market testing on what might be of interest to your learners.
All right. Can I interrupt with a couple of questions?
Of course.
All right. Yeah, so my first question is about assessment results. So I'm wondering, and I'm curious about people that are listening. Maybe you can answer in the chat if this applies to you. I'm wondering how many of our learning departments and associations are looking at their data at that level of granularity, at the question by question, on a question by question basis. So now I know that there are certain associations that are certification bodies, or maybe, more commonly something like the American Dental Association or something like that, right? Where they have these certification exams. They have whole teams of scientists essentially that are kind of scrutinizing those questions. But, for those of us that are, trying to provide a kind of unique member benefit, we're competing with outside sources that may even be free in some cases, right? And we just want to, provide some quick tips and tricks, these kinds of things. I'm just wondering how prevalent is that, right? I mean, is that, would you say that's most, or is that just a few that have really technical certifications? Is that something that we all should be doing, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it depends.
Of course.
That's hopefully a valid response.
Of course.
It depends. In my mind, it really depends on how high stakes that assessment is. If this is an assessment that a learner needs to be successful on in order to get a certification, in order to get a credential, then that kind of drilling down, I think, is really important. To be frank, it's a way to honor your learners and to make sure that you're giving them the best possible experience. If it's a low stakes assessment, and I know everyone has a crunch on time, then it may not be quite as important.
Okay. And maybe even somewhere in between, right? Where,
Yeah,
we don't, for those high stakes ones, we need to hire you, or, or someone like you, or even outsource that sort of thing entirely. But even for those that are, lower stakes, right? But still, we want to make sure that we're putting out good content just amongst our own learning teams, right? We can make some attempts, right, to use the data we have to improve this. Okay, great. Other thing is to use the term microlearning. We hear that's like kind of a new thing, or at least it's new to me recently, hearing about that among associations. So just tell us a little bit more about that. Like, is that something that is already quite prevalent? It's something we should start to think about, or kind of what are you seeing there?
so I think microlearning, for one thing, part of the problem with it is that there's so many different definitions. So for my purposes, I'm just going to say a really short learning experience that covers at most one learning outcome or learning objective. Okay. And so it's designed to be really short and sweet. I don't have a lot of clients that are using it for their like for-credit content or their paid content. What I'm seeing clients do, and what I'm encouraging right now, is to use microlearning again as that marketing tool. And to say, okay, we have this pool of people who I'll call them member adjacent, like they've been kind of lurking with our organization for years. Let's send them this really targeted email with a link to a 5-minute interactive e-learning module that goes over one learning outcome. Really short, really sweet, and use that as a marketing tool and as a member engagement tool.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. Really smart. Anyone's doing that, let us know, and we will applaud you for that. One last question on microlearning is the other thing that I hear very often is, we really need to do this microlearning because of we want to appeal to our younger members, right? The young professionals, and that's their attention span is really short, and so we have to appeal to them. Is that valid, or is that just is that a myth?
That's a really, really good question. I am going to go with my personal opinion here, sure, which is the age of the learner. It doesn't matter. What matters is the role type, the kind of conditions that they're doing their learning under. If you're a medical organization and you're developing training for nurses, whether you've been in the field for 5 years or 30 years, a 5-minute video on how to do this one task or this one skill is going to be more valuable to you than an hour-long interactive e-learning scenario. Okay. So that's my personal opinion. I'm sure there are other folks that have different opinions about it. But to me, it's not so much a generational thing as it is what kind of job do they have? What kind of role type do they have where they're doing this learning, and under what conditions are they doing the learning?
Yeah, totally agree. I think we got it right there. So Nathan and Amanda chimed in. Right, young people aren't the only ones with shortened attention span, right? So I think that hits the nail on the head.
I got a short attention span. I think COVID kind of wrecked all of our attention spans. Okay, so once you've done that process of doing the kind of the close-up and the big picture, then you can start making your plan and converting that data into actionable items. And so you're taking the data, you're looking at your current content, maybe you're looking at content that you dream about or you'd like to make someday, and you're looking at your strategy, your organizational strategy, and you start developing that plan. And what that looks like for my clients is what we call a scope and sequence. And that's where you're mapping out your content and you're also refining your learner types. And so I'm going to show you an example of a scope and sequence. This is a really generic one that I created for these purposes, for sharing with potential clients and with webinar participants. And so you're taking all your courses. Let's say you have a course on culture, and then you have all your learning outcomes over here. You're aligning that with the strategic plan, and you're using language from the strategic plan to make sure that you're in alignment. This is really important because I know learning and development, sometimes we have a hard time explaining to leadership or explaining to our board the return on investment, or how what we're doing is actually aligning with the strategic plan. So if, as much as possible, align that way. And it just helps you, especially like with year-end reporting, when you've got to write your annual report to the board members or to the leadership, you can really go back to this document and say, we developed these 4 courses based on the language here in the strategic plan. I'm going to skip over these columns just for time purposes, but then you're also going to align those learning outcomes to job titles. So within your organization, and maybe job titles isn't appropriate for your learner, maybe you have the industry or the field that they work in instead that would be more appropriate. But the idea is the same, that you're identifying your learner types. And this is where I go back to the marketing team and I say, go to your marketing folks, because they've probably already segmented a lot of your data around their marketing avatars or their marketing groups. And so you want to make sure that you're working with your marketing team on this. You may want to have columns around the stages of their career. Like I said, a lot of organizations are looking at developing content for people who are new to the career and who just need, there's some identified gaps in their understanding. And so you want to make sure that you're creating content around that. And then you're also mapping out all your topics and making sure that all the topics that you cover in your courses and your learning outcomes are mapped here. Now, some of my clients also need additional categories around levels of education. Maybe you're doing, maybe you're creating content for lawyers and doctors and priests. Okay, now that we've got a joke about a bar, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you want to make sure that you have categories for types of education or levels of education, if that's appropriate for your organization. Some of my clients work with different federal agencies, and so they are going to have categories for, we create content for DoD, we create content for CDC, whatever. So based on what you have learned, what you learned from your conversation with your marketing team and the data that you already have about your learners, you can start to map this out. And this is really, like I said, addressing the gaps between data, between strategy, and between the content that you currently have. So you can go down and say, oh gosh, we have tons and tons of content for our new to career folks around heart arrhythmias, but we don't have any intermediate or advanced material around that. And so maybe we need to start thinking about developing that.
So
the other piece of this spreadsheet is you can also do a separate tab around what your competitors are offering and mapping out their learning outcomes as much as you can. I know a lot of that stuff is behind a paywall, but as much as you can, look at the learning outcomes that they're teaching to as well, and making sure that you're comparing not just the learning outcomes, but the price, whether it's included as a member benefit or not, number of credits that they're offering. All of those kinds of scans of the market can be really helpful in determining what you should do next.
Okay, sorry to interrupt again, but
no worries.
Sorry guys, I'm learning as we go, just like you all are. So this is want to ask a few questions about this. The first thing is, how often so first of all, I mean, presume that people listen and they're interested in doing something like this, that you can help with that, right? I mean, that's they could reach out to Blue Sky, and it's not just about a tool, right? It's about how to use that tool effectively. So going through a kind of a strategic process like this, something that I think most of us probably could use some help with. Now, let's say that we've done this, right? We've mapped all this out with our learning outcomes. How often would I go back and revisit this, right? And make sure that it's still valid? How often would I update it?
So the beauty of doing this is that it's a heavy lift at the beginning, but then if you maintain it over time, so every time you create a new class, you're adding that to your spreadsheet. So once the initial work is done, it's fairly easy to maintain. Of course, if you go in and change the pricing on all of the classes or something like that, that's going to take a little bit of time. But once the courses are created and they're added to the spreadsheet, then it's just a matter of adding new content as you create it. And I would really encourage you to use this as a map for future content. So this is really showing the scope, but you could also create the sequence in here as well. So in this one, culture comes first, leadership development comes second, diversity comes third. And so you're also creating the sequence. Well, maybe you identify a gap in your sequence. You want to make sure that you identify the learning outcomes that will fill that gap before you ever start creating content. So making this spreadsheet be kind of a record of what you currently have, but also a vision for where you're going.
Great. And then, so if I created with some of my content and I have some objectives for particular learner types, right? And then let's say that I find out through those LMS reports or, through some other method maybe, but I find out that either, those learner types are either not really engaging with that content the way that I thought they would, or maybe they are, but they're just not performing well, for example, right? So what do I do then? Is that an adjustment that I just make in my course content, or do I have to go back and sort of revisit my scope and sequence as well?
So I would really look at the why. Why is that happening? Why do you have low engagement? Before you even review your learning outcomes, because your content could be beautiful. It could be perfect. I mean, it's not perfect, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's really doing its job. The problem may be that you're marketing to the wrong group, or that you're and that's in my mind, that's probably going to be the most common problem, is that you're marketing to the wrong group, or you haven't fine-tuned your marketing enough.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so once you've got your scope and sequence, we're going to go back to our PowerPoint here. Once you got your scope and sequence, then you're going to look at creating that feedback loop. And it's really kind of happening in conjunction with your scope and sequence process. They hopefully will happen concurrently, but start having those regular meetings with your marketing team and your education team to make sure that the data that is being collected is shared with both teams, because they have really valuable perspectives and insights that are going to really help you to flesh out what that scope and sequence needs to continue to look like, constantly refining your learner types, maybe adding more categories as you learn more about your learners, and just keeping that open line of communication together with marketing is really important. The other piece that I would say is, as you're developing new content, start thinking about how to market the content while you're building the course. So rather than waiting to the end, which is what we all do, you get done with this beautiful course and then you say, well, heck, now how are we going to market this? Rather than doing that, this is really a glamorous name. I call it a content matrix. Bill, you renamed it something. I don't remember what you called it.
I actually don't either. I'll try to remember. I'll try to remember that.
Okay.
I'll take credit for it too.
This is just kind of loosely based on a change management principle of tell people 7 times, 7 different ways. And I think it's a really helpful marketing tool as well. So once you've written your course description and your learning outcomes, then you can start dropping that into your matrix here. And so you say, well, the email is going to go out. We'll include the course description and a link to the blog. And the blog is the summary of the first 3 learning outcomes from the course. And then in your newsletter article, you're using the course description and the link to the blog to help get attention to this new course. As you're filming your SMEs for a video-based course, for instance, take 45 seconds of that SME video and use it on LinkedIn. Drop a quotation from the SME onto Twitter or onto your website or in your newsletter. And then, of course, once you've run a pilot or you've run the first few courses, you can start using the results from the course evaluations to market the course as well. And so you're creating this plan while you're creating the course. I have yet to meet a marketing person who says, no, I've got plenty of materials, don't bother. So this helps to kind of, again, have that relationship between marketing and education where you're really working collaboratively to make sure the course is successfully marketed.
So is this just a subset of the overall marketing content plan, or is this something that the learning team should maintain on their own, separate from that?
That's a great question. I would say that at minimum, the learning team needs to be providing input. You know, because they're going to know, oh, for this course, the SME is going to be really strong for a LinkedIn video. Let's go ahead, even if video isn't involved in the course, maybe it's a voiceover PowerPoint, or maybe it's a live webinar. If you can get them to record 45 seconds ahead of time and use it to market the course. So I think that's where, again, that relationship between education and marketing is really important, and working collaboratively to provide input on what's going to be most effective.
Okay, great.
Okay, so you've got your feedback loop. What other types of data would be helpful to you? We've talked about a lot of stuff here. What would be helpful to you? And I'm going to take this moment to look at the chat here and see if I've missed anything. Yes, someone mentioned, Max mentioned they're developing OKRs. So you want to match up learning outcomes with OKRs. That's excellent. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. And someone is using QStream for microlearning. I'm going to write that down so I don't forget to look at that. Thanks for sharing that resource. Okay. Any other types of data?
No takers on other types of data. You know, as Kristen was showing the previous slide with the feedback loop, it has this. Let's see. Right, it has this this blue circle in the background, and I was thinking, you know, this is a lot of what Acumen does, right? I mean, so this is not going to be a sales pitch about Acumen, but I think a lot of you know that Acumen is a data analytics platform, so we're in the business of integrating and aggregating all this, you know, member and customer touch point data, right? And all of that helps to inform how you market, right? How you segment. You know, your overall audiences, you know, learners being a part of that, how do you provide them with the right content and all of that. So there's tons of different data that go into that. It's, you know, website data, it's things that happen in your online community, it's all kinds of purchases and all of that behavioral data that you have. More and more, we're able to determine sentiment, right? Some of that psychographic stuff, you know, sentiment, attitudes, interests, things like that. And so all of that, you know, goes into how we determine, right, the best course, right? That's like the titles, right? The titles that we need to offer and some of the learning objectives that we need to address. And then if we, you know, if we're really diligent about it, we can then use some of that data on the actual performance to just perform better overall. Okay. Right. So it's been a while since we've shown this slide, right? But the idea is, again, we have all of those different data sources. That the LMS is just one of them. And so most of the time we're talking about how we can use all of, how can we use the LMS data to inform the other types of products and services and event sessions and things like that we should have. This one, we're kind of turning it around a little bit. We're talking about all the other data and how that informs what we should do with our LMS and with our learning products. But in either case, we have to have integrated data. We have to have a platform and a repository to put that data. So that's essentially what Acumen does. Okay, and so this is kind of a framework, for data-informed content that we've talked about before. But the idea is, for all of those types of data, we have to collect it. We have to have that repository. We have to have a way to organize it. We have to integrate it into some kind of a standard model that allows us to analyze, right? We want to visualize it in some kind of a tool, and we want to take action. Ultimately, if we don't take action, then then all of the rest of these are kind of moot point. Okay, and we want to be targeted and relevant, right? So not to go through the whole process of segmentation, but the idea is we don't have this homogeneous group of learners or just of customers and members more broadly. We have learner types, right? We have personas, right? That your marketing team has put together, and those learner types and those personas are based on all of the different types of data that we can gather, right? All of the things that we know and can know about our members and customers, our purchases, our behaviors, our attitudes, sentiment, and all of that. And when we, it's one thing to know that, but it's another to actually take action on that and develop our marketing plans, develop our calls to action, develop our sequence and our scope of our courses so that we're we're keeping those things in mind. Okay, so Acumen Learning is one of the modules that's in the product. It works kind of hand in glove with LMS products, and essentially what we're adding to the LMS experience is this ability to look at it not so much by learner, but more like course by course, and looking at it or groups of courses or groups of topics and looking at those over time. And the idea is, how can we provide a better learning program overall, right? And part of that is, how do we improve each individual course, right? How do we make sure that we're meeting the learning objectives? How do we make sure that that the courses remain relevant and that people like them and all that, right? So things like evaluations and sentiment are really important along those lines. So, basically, we're not just looking at registrations. We're not looking at it simply from like a revenue or even an engagement standpoint. We're looking at it from the standpoint of how we can provide better overall education. So, so if we think about it as engagement data versus learning data, and I know that learning is a subset of engagement, so it's not like they're two totally separate things. It's just a matter of how we look at this. So this document, this diagram here is a little bit busy, but bear with me for a second. Here's what we're looking at, right? In the outer circle are all these other types of content that we talked about, right? So you have email, you have maybe website content, white papers, resource materials, things like that. Maybe you have videos or podcasts or things that can be downloaded, and of course, products that I can purchase. All those kinds of things inform the type of learning products that are going to be relevant to our members, right? And not just all our members, but to specific segments of our members, right? So all of the different, the yellow ones and the green ones and the blue ones and whatever, right? And then we have that scope and sequencing that Christian was talking us through, where we're looking, on a more, right? So that's getting a little bit deeper than titles and topics and just the engagement, like whether we engage with the learning content or not. This is where we can take that to the next level and provide a better learning experience. And actually, we're the industry experts, right? In our associations, so we have that. We can provide that unique value, right, to members. So we can do it better, right, than the competitors that are kind of external to our industry, and we can do that kind of uniquely through Learn, right? So that's that more granular data that we can use to improve those courses. Okay, but anything that I missed there, Kristen? Is that kind of capture it?
No, I think it's good.
Okay. So what about next steps?
So your first step is to really start just gathering the data and getting it into one place, and more importantly, making a plan for looking at it, because it's really easy to say, oh, I'll drop this report into the shared drive, or I'll drop this report into Microsoft Office. But if you don't have a plan for when you're going to look at it and make a plan for how you're going to use it, then it becomes useless. So the next steps are kind of happening concurrently, but take on little bits at a time rather than trying to rework your whole organization's approach to this. But start working on refining those learner types and meeting with your marketing team to, like I said before, share information on how the data are segmented, and really focus on getting the good data that you need to refine those learner types. You're going to work on that scope and sequence document and map out your content that you currently have with your learner information, and then identifying the gaps, not just with your content, but also with your competitors. And then consult with your SMEs and make sure that you're staying current on things, that your SMEs can be really helpful in identifying gaps they're probably maybe doing some work for one of your competitors as well. And so they're going to have a perspective on your data that maybe could be helpful to you. Not that you're asking them to share competitor information, but they're just going to have a perspective on your data that others might not. And so making sure that you're working with your SMEs is really an important but sometimes forgotten step.
All right. Question about learning types. How is that different from just the broader personas, right? The marketing team probably has personas that they sort of have in mind for their different campaigns. And how do we integrate the idea of learner types with whatever ideas marketing has of buyer personas and things like that?
Mm-hmm. Probably your learner types, again, those categories across the top of your spreadsheet, your learner types are going to be more discrete categories of your personas. So you're taking your persona, let's say you have a persona called John, who works at another association that's adjacent to yours. And so you start breaking down other aspects of that persona and creating columns on the spreadsheet that reflect the points on that persona.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, it is. And so that's not even to. I'm curious if learner types are a thing that that associations are doing. It's not a question that I would routinely ask when we talk with learning teams and talk about LMS integrations and things. So I'm curious if you're listening and learner types are something that you do in addition to whatever marketing does with personas. That would be an interesting thing to hear about. Okay.
Well, and that brings up another point that is really helpful and probably could be the subject of a whole nother webinar, which is once you have your learning types, you can really start looking at individualized customer journeys through your content.
Yeah.
And start working with your learning management system to create custom journeys so that the learner logs into the LMS. So let's say they go to our Blue Sky has an LMS called Path. Let's say they log into Path and immediately what shows up are the courses and the content that is customized for them. So they're not swimming around in your LMS going, I don't know what course to take next. I don't know what is the next step in my certification journey, all those kinds of things. So that learner type, creating that learner type is really the foundational work to then create learner journeys.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what about resources?
So like I said, the scope and sequence worksheet, that's going to come to you via email. This is what you renamed the content matrix, Bill. You called it the Learning Content Planner, which is a much, much better name than what I came up with. And so we'll be sending that as well to help you just have a template to work from on, thinking about what kind of marketing materials you need to create. And then A2 has a relevant content webinar that'll be helpful to you, and that's going to come in the email as well.
All right, yeah, Katrina just dropped that in the chat. Yeah, there's a bunch of others there in the how-to section, but this one in particular is not specific to learning, but it's about products and services and content more broadly, and that's more about kind of like the outer circle in that diagram. How do we provide a learning experience that's going to be engaging and that's going to generate revenue, right? So kind of it gets to that outer circle, but it doesn't really do as much to to really improve the actual learning, right? To make sure that I learn all the right things and that I master the specific topics and the specific areas that I should, and that as the authority on that subject, the association should be in the business of making sure that I do. Okay, so those are resources, and I'm going to get Kristen to give us some key takeaways here.
Yeah, so just thinking about your sources of data in terms of the close-up data that you're pulling from your LMS, or pulling from a product like A2's product. So doing that close up, and then also do the big picture, making sure that you have both perspectives when you're looking at your data and your content. And then using that to look for the gaps between the data, the content, and the strategy. As you get into this, you'll probably think of new areas that you need to explore with data that maybe you can't currently pull. And so making sure that you're evaluating your sources of data, your content, and your strategy. And then work on building that scope and sequence to build and evaluate your content plans, and mapping out how your content relates to your learner types is really important. Bill, you want to speak to the last two?
Yeah, last two, I mean, really just said these, right? So broader engagement data, all the other stuff that we know, right, across all those different data sources that we've now, in our make-believe association, we've integrated all of that data, so we understand the journey through the different platforms and touch points. We want to use that to inform our learning content, and then we want to use the performance data, the assessment data, all of those things to make sure that we're improving our learning content, so we're providing that unique value. All right. So Charlene has popped into the chat with a really good question. What type of content do you offer to those who learn by doing? I'm kicking that straight over to you, Kristen.
Yeah. Learn by doing. I really, I think that one way that you could do that, I don't have a lot of clients right now who are working on this, but providing those instructional videos, so I use an example of a nurse. Nurses already know how to do this, but I'm going to just use this as an example. A nurse doesn't know how to insert an IV in an arm. And so you're providing that instructional video, and then you're also giving the learner questions to ask themselves, because they're in essence teaching themselves how to do this. Give them questions to ask themselves to confirm that they're doing it correctly. And so a lot of times those learning by doing tasks are step-by-step sequential processes or steps. And so if you can help the learner think through that mental list of steps by showing them the video, giving them a chance to practice independently, and then giving them questions to ask themselves to help them to figure out what they're doing well and what they need to work on. I think that's, if you give me a more specific answer, I might be able to add to that, or a more specific example, I might be able to add to that.
All right. Cool. Any other questions? Keep them coming in the chat or the Q&A, and we're just going to wrap up with a few housekeeping items about some upcoming events and content.
Great, thanks. We have a webinar coming up, Roses and Thorns of an LMS Strategy, and we have a couple of blogs that are linked to this QR code. Just going more into learning strategy, repurposing content. That's a topic that's really hot with a lot of our clients. And then for those of you who have a lot of virtual presenters, there's some tips that you can share, or a blog post that you can share with your subject matter experts, your virtual presenters, to help them think through how they can improve their delivery.
All right, thanks. I'm feeling a little self-conscious about our titles now, this Roses and Thorns thing. That's very descriptive there. Okay, so this one is not too bad, right? The piece of the pie, right? Thanksgiving is coming up and all of that. So we do have this webinar coming up. It's about ROI for analytics, about how to make that business case. And if you're someone that believes in data-informed decisions, trying to get some budget allocated to pursue that, through tools and processes in your association, this will be one for you. Then we have another one coming up on the 8th. This is also with a partner, and we're talking about value management, right? So how do we create a compelling value proposition, and how do we refine and manage that over time, and keep our organizational strategy kind of aligned with these core principles of value. So both of those are going to be really interesting. Hope that that you can join us for those. And let's see what else we have. Just a thank you. I want to thank Kristen for joining us. I mean, you guys could tell I was kind of fascinated with this as much as you were. A lot of it was new to me. So hopefully I didn't derail things too much with my questions. Maybe some of those were questions that that you had as well.
Thanks, Bill. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Thanks again. Hope to see you all again soon, and have a great day.